sing our songs when others have gone by. I close my eyes in a world far away. We may meet again, but now hear my song about the dawn of the night. Let's sing the bird song. Tomorrow will take us away, far from home. No one will ever know what is, but the bird songs will remain. Tomorrow will take it away, the fear of today, it will be gone. You two are magic songs.
So now we have hard confirmation. This has been something I've been thinking about since the beginning, something I haven't really brought up because I really wanted it to be in the news cycle before I address the elephant in the room, right? I really want people to think about this for 2 seconds, rub what few brain cells you have together to understand what's actually happening here. Dungeons and Dragons is a declining brand. The tabletop RPG is going downhill. The tie-in books are going downhill. Spin-off material isn't doing well. And, other associated projects like Magic the Gathering are also not doing well. Wizards of the Coast is a failing company. And anyone who knows anything about them, who's talked about this at all, will tell you that. And they will explain to you why. Now, the reason this is important, is because we recently have some hard confirmation from the news sites, from the community, that newer Dungeons and Dragons products are not doing well. Okay, like the new stuff is completely failing. I know a lot of hardcore fans who are just no longer contributing to the new content. They are essentially breaking out old books. They're not interested in engaging with new material from the company anymore because it's garbage and has been garbage for a long, long, long time. People are not willing to support the company behind their favorite game anymore. And this is really amusing to see, considering this is happening right after the wake of Baldur's Gate 3, which was supposedly the highest grossing video game ever produced, right? This is supposed to be the most critically acclaimed, the most popular, the most played game on Steam. Baldur's Gate 3 was a cultural phenomenon, according to gaming journals. And yet, in the real world, it's not talked about. It's not remembered nearly as well as its direct competition. It hasn't had an enduring legacy. Nobody really remembers or talks about the game at all. And what's more, the game has not had any impact on the relevancy or popularity of Dungeons and Dragons as a whole at all, right? If Baldur's Gate 3 really was like the industry defining RPG, right? If these Dungeons and Dragons mechanics and like aspects were so popular, you would be seeing people blow the doors off at Wizards of the Coast. Oh, give us the new set. Oh, I'm ready to get in the game. You would think this would be an entry point for a lot of new players, right? But that simply isn't happening. Baldur's Gate 3, much like Dungeons & Dragons as a whole, essentially has this audience now that wants to co-opt it for political purposes. People looking to push an agenda, people like, wokesters essentially, right? They aren't interested in video games, fantasy, or role-playing. What they care about is normalizing their degenerate fantasies in this setting, to shove it in into as many things as possible, right? And that's why the real reason Baldur's Gate 3 was worshipped the way it was. Because it allowed you to do all sorts of depraved sexual acts with every NPC in the game, right? Like that's essentially what it really truly at its absolute core boils down to. It had nothing to do with the mechanics, the story, the characters, your decision making. The real reason is because obese, blue-haired cunts wanted it to be popular, right? And these aren't a demographic. This isn't a demographic that plays a lot of games or knows anything about them or has any real viable opinions as to what should constitute game of the year, right? And yeah, like this demographic has evaporated just as quickly as it can. Not only has Baldur's Gate 3 not had any long-term relevancy at all, we're also seeing that Dungeons and Dragons as a brand is continuing its long, lengthy decline into irrelevancy. And it couldn't have happened to a more deserving brand, right? Because I am so sick and tired of that community acting as if Dungeons and Dragons is some hallmark thing for fantasy as a genre, that it made it mainstream or popular, or that it's some major cultural phenomenon. It isn't, like Dungeons and Dragons is cringe. It's basic, it's boring. Nobody wants to hear about how it supposedly influenced, like, I don't know, Zelda or whatever, right? Like, I keep seeing people say this, is that like, it's some hugely influential thing for modern fantasy. Is that why modern fantasy is so terrible? Because the authors base it off of their terrible D&D campaigns. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It's definitely unbelievably cringe. But yeah, like looking at this situation, looking at how it's developed, looking at just like the coping and seething online, yeah, this is gonna be really interesting to see, because Baldur's Gate 3 is a really interesting phenomenon, because the thing everyone used to try and prop up the game as like some hallmark success story. Oh, it's the D&D license. The D&D is the greatest thing ever. Like, you know, it's not D&D that's popular. It's Larian and their degeneracy. All the depraved things they were willing to do for their audience to get a semblance of attention for a couple of weekends, right? Like, Larian is the studio that like the gaming community tried to rally behind, not the Wizards of the Coast aspect of it. Like Larian specifically, and it's only a matter of time until like the House of Cards for Larian falls as well. I really don't think they'll be able to put out another game under these conditions. But we'll see what they do. But it needs to be understood that these people, these developers, need to be condemned by the community, because this is something that never should have been allowed to happen. This idea that a bunch of secondaries could come into the gaming community and tell us that Baldur's Gate 3 is the greatest game ever made because you could choose the size of your vagina. Like, anybody who seriously thinks that, or endorsed it, or supported it, or enjoyed it, like, they have no business being part of the gaming community.